Hey folks, David Stewart here. I got a cool little question on Facebook, a hard question to answer, so I thought I'd do a little video on it. Here's the question. Okay, so I'm kind of a fantasy elitist. Tolkien, Jordan, Erickson, and a few fantasy video games are inspirations of mine. My problem is with names, not of people and places, but names of things like seasons, real-world animals, etc. I put together basic plot, developed key lore and events, but I went crazy with names of things. Races and languages are kind of a big thing in my world. I feel if I have 4 characters that speak common but have different native languages, refer to spring as something else, just as an example, a lot will be lost in translation. Any advice for tackling this? Tusen tak. I'm not saying people are too dumb to understand Vetter means winter, but I pulled a Silmarillion. So this is a really great question and can be answered a bunch of different ways. So I'll try to answer it in a bunch of different ways. So first of all, Tolkien is a really sort of special exception, an exceptional thing in the world of literature and the world of fantasy, in that he was a linguist. And so he created imaginary languages using his professional skills and brought them into his fantasy world. And there's people who actually speak Sindarin today, which is really interesting. Just like people speak Klingon. It's an imaginary language. It's a language Tolkien made up. But having that language and having so much thought go into what Sindarin is, and he made a lettering system for it and everything that's really cool, that adds an extra level of depth and history to the world that's kind of hard to replicate. In fact, I do not attempt to do what Tolkien did because I don't have his skill set. I don't have the language understanding he did. You know, he could just read Anglo-Saxon. He knew all these old languages, and each of his sort of imaginary languages is kind of more or less based on one of these historical languages that he was a scholar of. Well, I can't do that, and that's not where my talent is, and I don't have years to develop that kind of thing and then bring it into my fantasy thing. So I don't try to replicate it, but you can kind of hint at things the same way he did. One of the things my wife said with Lord of the Rings is that she really appreciated how everything had a name. And I know that this question is saying he doesn't have a problem with names of places and things. But in Lord of the Rings and in The Hobbit, everything has a name. Like they cross a river and it has a name. People have names. There's so many different characters. They all have names. Every place has a name. And that gives a huge amount of depth to the setting. It makes you feel like the story is taking place in a real world, and that world has a history, and those people are actually alive. They have a name and a place in that entire sphere of existence. And that's the thing that's worth noting about that, and seeing if you can duplicate that, give everything a name. And you can hint at some other language, but unless you have some significant proficiency with constructing languages or understanding a wide variety of other languages, particularly historical languages, I wouldn't attempt to replicate what Tolkien did. But if you did do some additional languages, how should you use them? Well, with this question, you have a word that stands in for winter. My personal feeling on this, and you could go either way with this, but this is my opinion, is that if you have an English word that means exactly what this other word means, you should probably just use the English word because you're writing in the English language, or whatever language you're writing in. If you're writing in Polish, use the Polish word for it, obviously. So you have a Polish word for winter, you're writing for a Polish audience. No reason to make them read the Sanskrit version of winter and learn a new word that means something that they already have a basic concept and a conceptual understanding of. Now you can use a made-up word for winter if you're going to be using it multiple times in the book and it has some kind of significance. So if you use Vetter for winter, and the characters have a Vettergarden festival or something, right? Then you could call it Vettergarden, and then you have a word that has specific meaning. Now just to take examples from the books I've written, so I wrote a historical fantasy book called Muramasa Blooddrinker. It takes place in Muromachi period Japan. Lots of things have Japanese words for the thing, whatever the object is. And what I tried to do is I tried to use the Japanese word if it was referring to something very specific in form and function for that setting, that time, and that place. For instance, the word katana. A katana is a type of sword, but it's a very specific kind of sword. So if you have someone with a katana and someone with a tachi, those are two different arrangements of a curved sword. And I have to kind of explain what those two mean because they're using different tools. But I want to use the actual specific word for that kind of sword versus just saying sword or a curved sword or something like that. Or if you do something really bad and say like a saber or scimitar. A katana is not a saber or a scimitar, though all of those are curved. And so I had to make decisions about when I was going to use those words or not. It's like I could use saya for the scabbard, or I could just use scabbard because it means the same thing. If I say scabbard to someone, they're like, "Oh, scabbard's the thing the blade goes into." They're going to imagine what that is accurately. So I don't have to use saya. I did use saya because I think it adds a little bit more depth to it. But you can it's just another synonym for scabbard that you could use: scabbard, sheath, saya, whatever you want to use. I think I had one person was like, you said handle, you used handle for the handle of the sword. You should call it a hilt. It's like, did you know what handle meant? And the answer is yes. It's like, I wanted to use a word that readers would know what it meant. And so if you use nothing but technical jargon, you might confuse a reader. And I actually had footnotes in Muramasa because I had early feedback when I was using words and they're like, I don't know what that word means. Even words that you may really easily know, like kimono. Not everyone knows what a kimono is or has an idea what a kimono is, but a kimono is something specific. Obviously I want to use that word. But if I have like another English word that works, I'll just use that. So like I don't have to use the Japanese word for bowl when it's a bowl. We can just say bowl and people imagine a bowl or a small bowl or however you want to describe it. So that's sort of my razor. Now another interesting thing is that if you have a setting that doesn't have 4 seasons the way we have it, going back to this idea of using better as winter. If you have a setting that takes place in the tropics, they don't have, spring, summer the way that we do in the northern and southern hemispheres. They might have a wet season and a dry season, and they'll have words for those, and you can use those. I wrote a book that takes place on a tidally locked planet. Obviously, they're not going to have words for seasons because there are no seasons when one side of the planet's always facing the sun and one side's always in the dark, which is how that planet was arranged. And if you could go look at Brandon Sanderson's books, the Stormlight Archive, the Way of Kings, Words of Radiance, and the new one, Oathbringer. That's it, not Oathbreaker. He uses certain words in a contextual way that have specific meaning in that setting. So if you were to look at the map, there's like a stormward direction and a leeward direction, but he still just uses east-west because we understand north-south, east-west. We know sort of what's going on in those directions. But he also alludes to certain seasonal changes that are unique within the world. So they have a time called the Weeping, which instead of having these big destructive high storms that start on one side of the continent and go to the other, they have these gentle rains that last for weeks at a time and then leave all the buildings covered. The buildings are always covered in this like mud sediment called creme, which creme is a word, but he uses it in a new way. It has a new specific meaning, and you start to learn the meaning of these words because they're used so frequently. So if you're going to use them a lot, yeah, you can use a new word. Or if it's something new and special to that setting, yeah, you can use that new word and it's good. And it'll add that extra depth and it'll make it feel more real and alive. At the same time, Brandon Sanderson also hints at things that probably could be described directly, and I don't know if the hinting at it enhances it or not, but an example is the people of Shinar are described as looking like children and having big eyes. And what he probably means there is the people of Shinar look Caucasoid. They look like Europeans, with big eyes. And the people in the eastern part, the stormward side of the continent, probably have narrower eyes. They probably have more like Asian eyes. And so you can imagine if he had said they had almond-shaped eyes, that already doesn't make sense for the people that live there. Because the people that live there, eyes are just eye shape. If you lived in China and you never saw anyone from outside of China, you wouldn't stop and think about describing eyes as like almond shaped or some other thing like that, because they're just the shape of eyes. They're simply eyes. So he hints when the Shinaran comes around, it's like has the big eyes, the big Caucasoid eyes. That's a hint of what the people in the normal sort of main area of the story actually look like. And that's kind of interesting as well. I know that doesn't have anything to do specifically with the words, but it has to do with the way the characters interpret their world, and how centered you want to be on the characters' interpretation of the world and the way that they value those things. And if you have a new word that has a specific meaning that's different from what we normally use in English, use it, and make sure you use it often enough for the reader to understand it. And otherwise, I would say just use the English word so that you're conveying the meaning of what you want as quickly and clearly and specifically as you want, or whatever home language you happen to be writing in. That's my feeling on it, but you can do, obviously, if it's your story, you can do whatever you want. That's just my feeling on it. You guys have a great day. I will see you next time. I do have the fantasy stories that are out now, even in paperback, the Needle Ash stories. These are cool. In fact, in these, I probably, as far as new words, I probably erred a little bit on the side of too much caution. It's like, there's orcs, right? And I could have used a different word for orcs. Like I could have made up a word for what I wanted these humanoid non-humans to be. And I could have made up a new word, but I'm like, well, if I just say orc, people have a close enough idea of what these people look like. With a few extra descriptions, they will have constructed the view of what these people look like. And that's really what I wanted, rather than having to spend time saying these are this race and here's what they look like, and people be like, oh, so they look like orcs. And it's like, yeah, they kind of look like orcs. I should just skip that and do orcs. And so I did. And you can let me know whether that was a good decision or not if you pick them up or read them. If you're on my mailing list, you'll get a couple of them for free, and otherwise they're on Amazon. And I'll see you guys next time.